It does now.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Welcome. This is the third webinar. We're going to be going through new topics today. So we're going to be presenting the gap analysis of the administrative information, the consent and legal information in the mods, and also the audit information. I think someone else might be sharing their screen. Can everyone see my my screen now?
We can see a screen now.
Okay, no problem. Okay, cool. All right. Well, I'll get started now. So just to set a little bit of context for the project and the terminology product, if you haven't been on these calls before. So the terminology product is available on data.digital social care. So why is this being created? Well, I guess it's because there was no central place for data standards for users to come and find social care definitions, terminologies, collections, data standards. So there's lots of standards distributed, so lots of good work going on across the community, but there wasn't that central place to bring it all together. The second area was really about allowing standards users to contribute to standards development. So we wanted a place and a service desk where people could contribute, they could give us feedback, and again, to bring all of that information together. For standards developers, a key part of the project was we wanted in the development of standards to work in the open. We didn't want to be locked away in a room for 12 months and produce something that was new to the community. We wanted to constantly publish our work, our thoughts, so that we could get feedback and iterate the product. So again, the website was a place that we could publish all of that information. There's some tools that allow us to develop new standards and reuse existing standards, and ultimately it's a place for us to publish and share knowledge across the community. The minimum operational data set itself, which is the focus of the talk, is one of the products that is published through the terminology product at data.digital social care. Ultimately, it's really there to improve the quality of care. It's a way of trying to share best practice for data. We want it to develop into a common glue, which will allow care actors to share information, because we know there's lots of multidisciplinary teams involved in people's care. Ultimately, we want to create some kind of consistency across data returns and the way that different people communicate, reduce the burden around data entry so that organizations aren't sending the same data to lots and lots of different people in slightly different formats. I think we looked at health models at the beginning of this exercise, and we felt that there needed to be some modification for social care. And there's lots of good stuff in the health models that we could reuse, but ultimately it needed to be a new product that was developed for the use cases that the community brought to us. I think another area was around reinventing the wheel. So we know that different people and different organizations do things slightly differently, and that's obviously great. But ultimately, if there's some best practice that can be reused across the community, especially when it comes to data management, we really want to encourage that to make the whole process more efficient. I think one of the interesting things that's going on in the sector is around innovative assistive technology. And again, data standards will hopefully allow us to bring that technology in faster, because if that technology needs to create interfaces for every single provider or every different setting, that becomes very, very difficult and more difficult to integrate that. So again, that was one of the key use cases. And ultimately, we wanted to look at reducing costs, whether that was around reporting, whether that was building end-to-end pipelines or designing some of these systems. So very quickly, apologies if you've already seen all this stuff before, but hopefully that sets the context to why the mods is being developed. In terms of the engagement approach, this is the third of the webinars, so thank you for everyone who came to the previous ones. We took the approach of creating discovery phase last year, where we spoke to 100 people across the sector, and we tried to look at the real use cases that would be important for people across the system. We also did a landscape assessment to look at what data standards were being used across the sector as well. As part of that, we then went on to engage with social care practitioners as well as providers themselves and advocacy groups. And we've been trying to work in the open. So we've been doing these webinars. We had a couple in November where we presented the minimum operational data set alpha and the data catalog. We had another one in January, and we got, from all these sessions, we've got loads and loads of good feedback, which hopefully we've brought into the model that's been developed. And then we had some other ones in February and March, and we presented the beta in March. And a lot of those webinars can be found on the website, so you can go back and view those videos if they're of interest. We've also tried to get lots and lots of feedback. So we've had over 1,000 pieces of feedback for the tool and the minimal operational data set. So I'd really encourage people to take part in surveys. We do look at them and we do try and integrate them into the development. So I think one of the key things that comes out of this is we'll be sending those surveys out to everyone on the call. And if you can get back to us, it would be very, very much appreciated. In terms of the plan going forward, so we've been running these for topic groups. This is the third one on administrative consent, legal and audit information. The last one will be around instructions, activities and actions. And we're using this as a period to try and gather feedback on the specification, on the beta that was released in March. Then we'll go back and during August, we'll be drafting the next version of the mods. Also the next version of the conceptual model, with a view to trying to get that through a review process and publish it in October 2023. So this is a really, really important period to try and, make sure that what we produce is right. So if there's anything in there that you think's wrong, we really do value your feedback, and we'd like to find out about it as soon as possible. Because in October, then it goes through a national process, and it will go through a kind of standards review process. And at that point, it becomes more difficult to change some of the information in the standard. So we're really trying to get it right before that date. So today, so what are we asking for? So we're going to review the specification and the conceptual model. So I'll take you through what it looks like and the things that we're going to be working on over the next couple of months. Present that gap analysis, and then we'll be running a survey during the call where we'll be asking you to just look at the impact of a particular part of the data. So is it really, really useful? Should it be collected? And then also look at the burden. So is it realistic to ask all of the providers to collect information in this particular format? So the minimum operational data set itself, you can find it. Let me just share my screen. You can find it here. Everyone can see. So if you go to data.digital social care, we've got a couple of resources here. So the mods actually covers quite a few different areas. It's a data specification, which you can find here. And it goes into the types, the classes of information you'd expect someone to collect, and then actually goes down to an attribute level, looking at the types, again, of data you collect in the format that we'd expect someone to collect that data in. So the classes could be something like, the reason for admission, and then you'd expect that to be collected either as a coded value or some free text. Alongside this, we've got all of the webinars that have been done, so you can go back and look at those. And as we run sessions over the next few years, we'll be trying to publish all of the guidance and videos that go alongside this type of stuff. There is also a guidance document as well that will be published alongside the mods, and that's available in our wiki. You can see it here. It talks about the purpose of the project, the background. We go into things like the use cases that have been collected. And as the project develops, we'll be mapping or continuing to map those use cases to the information model, so the type of information we would collect at each step of someone's pathway. And So we've got the data specification itself, we've got the guidance, and then the other area is the conceptual model. So we've been building a high-level blueprint for social care data. This is based on ISO 13940 and CONSIS. And this is available here. So for example, for today, we'll be running through it, but it shows you kind of the key pieces of information that we would expect to be collected, and then the relationships between those different information models. So that's the mods, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. After the call, we'll be sending out feedback forms, which look a little bit like this. Ultimately, what we're asking is for each piece of information that we're including in the mods, we would like some information on the impact on care, high, medium, low, and also the burden. So do you think it's difficult to implement? Are you already collecting it in this format? Are you collecting it in a different format? And that'll allow us to go back and understand how feasible the information model is, and also whether there's any other feedback or anything we need to do to improve that model. So onto the gap analysis itself. So I'll be going through the three different areas. I'll look at the administrative information that we've pulled together for the specification, the legal information and consent, and also the audit information. So the conceptual model for the administrative information, I think, is fairly, hopefully fairly self-explanatory. Really, we've got, different bits of administrative information, such as correspondence. Usually they concern the subject of care, and yeah, usually they'll concern a care actor as well. The correspondence, obviously, there's the receipt and sending of a document. And there are a couple of bits of information in here that are out of scope currently. So financial information and compliance information have been taken out of scope now. They might come back in, but you can't boil the ocean. There's only so much you can do. So at the moment, we've put those into the conception model, but they're not going to be part of the specification. So let's start with correspondence. So there's a few pieces of information that we would like to update. What I'll do is I'll actually find it in the try and share my screen so you can see it in the data dictionary. So what we've got here is we've got the data dictionary online. Within the administrative information model, we've got the correspondence model, and we've got some information associated with this correspondence model. We've got the priority of the communication, when it was received, when it was sent, the status, the medium, so channel of communication, note, sender, recipient, subject, all of that good stuff. In terms of the gap analysis, at the moment, there are specific links to performing professionals. We want these to be references, so it can make the specification a little bit easier to read. I think if you've been in the last few talks, you'll see that that's a common theme. So it will make hopefully the model a little bit easier to navigate. I think there were a few things around confidentiality. So go back to content. So one of the bits of information was confidentiality. We need to do things like add the actual fire set. So at the moment, there's a high level view that you need to go to fire and you need to find the confidentiality set of codes. And what we would like to do around these codes is actually add them to the tool, so it can be a lot easier for you to navigate, so that rather than everyone having to go and find that information on another website, we'll try and put all of that information in. And that's the same for quite a few of these. So something like class, for instance, we would like to see whether there are codes there that we could use. And same with images. So we've got within content, there's additional information required for images, for instance. So, where all these codes are, we would like to bring those in, make them accessible so they're really easy to find. And the same goes with services. So, if you're talking about the service that's associated with the correspondence. We would like to add the coded value for those services. You can find them here. It's no need to see simple service reference set, but I think it would be easy to navigate if we put that information in. So hopefully that covers the gap analysis for correspondence. So the next one is the document model. Again, I think this one has come from PRSB, so hopefully it aligns with what's going on in practice. I think we've got similar comments. So we've got some information about the document itself, and then you've got information about the performing professional, so who was involved in creating the document, the person completing the record, and the service that produced the information. You'll notice that it's very similar to the correspondence model, and that is what you would expect, because quite often the content of the correspondence is a document itself. So hopefully that doesn't come too much of a surprise. So essentially the comments are really the same around this, which is we need to do some work to import all of the codes, and we need to make references to things like the performing professional. The person completing the record is something that should be included as part of the audit model. So again, if you're in the last webinars, that's something we're going to be taking out of all of the bits of this specification, because that information is recorded elsewhere, and we expect that to be attached to every single information record. So hopefully that goes through the high level information that you'd expect to collect as part of a document. Very quickly, name, confidentiality, title. Hi there. Did we have a question? I don't think so. I think maybe that was just a microphone was off.
Off mute, yeah.
On mute. Okay, no problem. Cool. So I think we can move on to the next piece of administrative information. So one of the things that we've seen across the model is that you've often got review dates created against some of the information records. Rather than just having the review date, what we'd like to do is attach a kind of an information class to reviews, which will have the date of the scheduled review, will have the focus of that review, a description of the activity, and the reason why that should be reviewed. In terms of the gap analysis around that, I think we've got very similar comments. So performing professional, for instance, will be a reference. Location should be a reference rather than including all of that information in the model. I think one of the things we found, and one of the bits of feedback we had, was quite often the responsibility for the review will be recorded. So a lot of the forms have that within them. So potentially we will be adding, as well as focus, description, reason, date, we'll also put the person responsible. I can see we have some comments in the chat, so we'll be recording them during the session. Hopefully we'll have time to get back to some of those comments as we go through. Okay, the comment is, sorry, I've got two things going on. This is about the live poll. So yeah, as we're going through, what we're going to do is keep the live polls open. But thanks, Tim. I definitely encourage you to fill them in. I think it gives us a good indication of what's the most important bit of information, so that we can obviously focus on that. So yeah, if people can fill in the polls while we go along, and we'll give everyone a bit of time at the end. Andrew, I think you've got...
I was just going to say, yeah, it's important. Well, it's a useful straw poll to understand how whether information is already, whether it's automated or manual collected, and or what level of difficulty it will be to implement. I mean, that's the critical thing. It may be super important, but it may be very difficult to implement in practice on the ground. So that's the kind of reason behind the poll, is so that we can gauge practicalities as well as the importance.
100%. Thanks, Andrew. And one of the general comments I think we have back for this specification is around what pieces of information are mandated, which pieces of information are required, and which pieces of information are optional. And this is one of the ways that we can start to dig into that and find out, what we would 100% expect to be collected versus, what should be collected, and then what's potentially optional. So yeah, this is the model for review. And the last piece of information is around transfer of care. I know we've got admission details as well, so we'll get to that in a sec. So the next one is transfer of care. So we haven't explicitly referenced every single other part of the mods in this. So sometimes if transfer of care was kind of a paper record and a single bit of information that, moved around with a person, potentially would be lots and lots more information that been here. This is really just talking about a transfer of care event, and what we would expect and what we hope with the mods is that this becomes the whole mods become something that can be shared across the system. So rather than having specific information that's shared as part of the transfer of care, you would have access to the rest of the information about a person, ideally through APIs or the shared care records on the other programs that are going on. So we haven't put those links explicitly, but the idea is that they would be there. In terms of the transfer of care, I think we've got the same kind of things around references, so we don't necessarily need these as sections within the model. We can just have a reference to it. We've got around kind of codes and namespaces. So at the moment, coded value for the type of transfer, we need to have the codes for that. So that's one of the things that was pulled up. And I know there's a lot of work going on around transfer of care within NHS Digital. So we're going to be coordinating with some of the information that's being published here as well. Things like e-discharge and health discharge clinic letters. So there's quite a few standards and pieces of information that are coming out at the moment. And we'll be doing a bit more work to align further with that over the next couple of months. Cool. So in terms of the last bit of administrative information in the model, we've got the admission details. So I think, high-level legal status of admission, date of admission, subject, so who's admitted, all of that kind of stuff is pretty self-explanatory. I think, again, when we're looking at individual accompanying the person, at the moment you've got name, role, comment, relationship. I think we just want to have a more general reference to another care actor, because there's a whole load of other information that could also be collected with that care actor. It could already be on the system, and so we'll just make that a reference. So legal status, again, on admission, I think we just need to bring in the codes. So we've got some stuff in the NHS Days Dictionary, so we'll import those in. And I think that's probably covers most of the information. I mean, this is, I think, a fairly well understood model, the admissions model that's being implemented in a lot of places. So I don't think there was a whole lot we wanted to change. Again, we've pulled in the information from the PRSB, so there weren't really many gaps in that one. And hopefully that covers the main pieces around admission details, the method, where they're admitted to, reason, responsible care professional, and specialty. So I think the next one we'll move on to is the legal information and consent. So let me just bring up the conceptual model for that through some of this, and we'll be sharing all of the slides after the meeting for everyone to go through. So legal information consent. So potentially all the activities, actions, instructions, plans, assessments require consent. So there will be a consent record associated with pretty much everything across the pathway or the delivery of care. There's some kind of specific things around LPA and the decisions that come off the back of that. Obviously, we need records of consent and dissent. Usually they're part of the same kind of record. And then the deprivation of liberty safeguards as well. And we've obviously got the subject of care proxy, who in some cases can state the dissent or consent. And with LPA will be assigned and makes decisions on behalf of the subject of care. The only things I think that aren't in scope on these ones is the information sharing model. So that wasn't part of the original scope of these activities. I think given how much we're doing at the moment, we're probably not going to get really into creating a really specific consent model for information sharing. The generic one does cover it, but doesn't go into detail. So I think, again, given the scope of what we're trying to do and how much we're trying to get through with this, that's probably not something that will go into a lot of detail in the mods. So I think in terms of the DOLs, let's start with the DOLs. And I think probably the best thing to do is just go through it in the tool itself. So we've got a section within the data dictionary area for consent and legal information. Kind of open that up to see what's within the consent and legal information spec. And let's start with the DOLs. So we've got the record, which is currently a text field. I think one of the things in here was we wanted to create an explicit link to the document. There will be all the forms, and that potentially could be stored somewhere, or the letters. So we should, we should have that available, or at least a link to it. One of the things we've seen again was around case IDs. Sometimes they're often collected, so it's a useful bit of information to have. There are a couple of other fields around the location authorized as part of the DOLs. So is the home or the care home, what's the location? One of the things again was around the RPR, so the representative and the proxy as part of that DOLs application. So again, that was one of the things we saw in a lot of, we've seen in the form, so we need to be bringing that information into the model. I think there's a fair bit to do on this one. There's the application status. I think, whether we could potentially codify this, was it terminated? Is it in review? Is it ceased? Is there a suspension? Has it been granted? Has it not been granted? I mean, there's a set process in there, so we should probably be trying to codify that to make it as consistent as possible. And then you've got the generic bits of information around, performing professional, just need a reference. We don't need to have it as a kind of a separate part, a separate section. It's really just a reference and an ID of the performing professional. So I think there's a fair bit more work to do on the DOLs at the moment, and I think we've got that planned over the next few months. The consent model has been, I think, taken from ISO 13606 and OpenAIRE and CONSIS. It's, I think, a fairly well used generic consent model. So I don't think we've got a huge amount to change or any gaps we've identified in it. I think that maybe in terms of terminology, we could change a few of the bits of terminology. I think because it's been taken from OpenAIRE, for example, we've linked out to the instruction activity action. I think we could just call that focus, for instance, the focus of the consent. I think we've used that type of terminology elsewhere in the model, so that could potentially be brought in. And then we've got the generic kind of feedback around you just need a reference location perform professional, and that should make the model slightly easier to navigate. And really, if we're building an information system, it would just be a key to the other bit of information that sits elsewhere in the system. So I don't think there's a huge amount that came out of that bit of gap analysis. To take you through it very quickly, we've got the focus, start date, end date of the consent, status of the consent, longer description, the form of consent. So was it written, verbal, other, all of that kind of stuff. A link to the evidence. So that's the actual documentation. Any caveats, reason why it was withdrawn or refused, if that's applicable. So I think it's a fairly covers most of the use cases. A general comment on all of these is that we need to change the mandation. So at the moment they're all 1.1, but the next part of the activity is we're going through and looking at whether something's required, whether it's optional, or whether it's mandated. And that's, I guess, as Andrew mentioned, that's the kind of key bit of the survey, because it allows us to dig into the bits that really, really should be required. And so CPR is the next one on the list. So under consent and legal information, we've got information about the CPR decision. Don't think there's too much on here. I think there's the generic comments around performing professional should be a reference, person completing the record, that's in the audit information, so we don't necessarily to explicitly mention it here as well. The generic comments about bringing in the codes, there are some codes mentioned here that are taken from the SNOMED CT, but we need to import them so it's a bit easier to navigate. There's the date for the review in this model. I think that should just be a reference to the generic review table that we've, or the review class that we've created as part of the administrative information. We don't need just the date of review. We should have the opportunity to add all that other information if it's applicable. And I guess one of the things we saw here is this slight difference of terminology. Sometimes we're calling it evidence link, for example, in consent. Sometimes we're calling it location of the document. So there's a bit of information to just make that a little bit more consistent across those different things. But I don't think this one needs too much more work. We haven't identified any other big gaps in this one. Next, lasting power of attorney. Let's close some of these down. So consent legal information, LPA. So we've got the kind of high level information is the date. And then we've got the record of who's appointed. I think, again, rather than having name of LPA and contact details, this could just link to the care actor. We've got a model for it, and potentially, name. We've got a model for those care actors and a structure for that. So we just expect a reference through to that. Location of documents, I think fine. Coded value for the LPA, and we just need to pull that information in. And then the same generic comments around location, performing professional, the person completing the record. Those should be references rather than having them as subsections within. They should just refer to another record elsewhere, to make the model a little bit more easy to navigate. And I think the last one around consent and legal information's around Mental Health Act. So section end date, section start date, obviously the subject of care, who the information is about. And we've got kind of the generic stuff around performing professional, person completing record, location, which will change a little bit. So I think we wanted the link to the evidence. We didn't see that in the model, so that's something that we would want to bring in. I think we've got a similar bit of information. We need to link to the care actor themselves. The supporting information codes, I think we need to dig into a little bit. At the moment, they're saying there's the community treatment order codes, but I think looking into that code set, I mean, we need to import the code set anyway, but looking into that code set, we just needed to clarify whether those were completely appropriate for that supporting information, or whether there's potentially a better name for the supporting information. So if the person is subject to the community treatment order or conditional discharge, what codes should we add there? So there's a little bit more investigation to go into there. And I think that covers most of the consent and legal information. So I think in general there are some tweaks. I think the one that probably needs a bit more work is the DOLs. There were quite a few things in there that I think we might need to bring in. But again, we'd ask for your feedback there. I mean, I think we're going to be doing targeted interviews as well around this, so that'll be a focus area. But please, when you do return the forms, if you disagree or agree, feel free to tell us. And I think the last so did I not do ADRT? Sorry, apologies if I. Yep, you're right. I do have it in my slides. Tim, thank you for bringing it up. So we've got ADRT. I skipped a slide. So I think this is fairly similar. So we've got the date, the subject of care. We've got the same comments around location, performing professional, person completing the record. We wanted to add the link to the document itself. We thought that was missing from the model. I think there's a more general. Thanks, Tim. I did have it. I've got it on my screen here. I don't know why I skipped straight to audit. So the link to the actual document, so the evidence, and then I think more generally, in terms of that advanced decision, what we see generally is you've got the treatment and then to refuse and in what circumstance. And again, I don't think that's represented very well at the moment within this particular model. So this is also one of the ones that we'll go back to because and it also ties into the person's wishes as well. So potentially what we want to do is we want to flesh out the model that we've currently got for a person's wishes in terms of, what those wishes are and in what circumstance. And then we could tie the ADRT into those specific things. So we've really broken that information up rather than just having a big piece of information. The other one in here is who's been informed or who should be informed, sorry. So which care actors should be informed of the ADRT? We see that in a lot of the forms, and that's typically what's there. Again, that's not in the model here, so it's probably something that we're gonna try and bring in. Then the communications that have been made. So those are the people who should have been informed. Then who has actually been informed, and then most of these forms also have some additional context or additional information that potentially could be recorded as well as part of the ADRT. So it's good we got pulled up on this. So the two areas we really need to, I think, do a bit more work is the ADRT and the DOLs, because again, I think they're quite light at the moment in terms of the information that's there. We wouldn't necessarily make all of that mandatory or even required, but I think starting to think about a little bit more detail in both of those sections hopefully will make the model a little bit more useful. Thanks again for Tim for pulling me up. I'm going. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I think we are actually now at the end of the consent and legal information. The last bit is around the audit information. I'll very quickly just bring up the conceptual model. I don't think there should be anything too controversial in there. Again, we've essentially taken 13606 ConSys OpenAIRE model for an audit table. This could also be considered a provenance model. So what we're saying with the audit information is with any any electronic system, every time someone creates a digital record, they modify it, they amend it, they attest it. So, that's a review or confirmation or a sign off. Or if they delete a record, there should be logs of that information. And those logs should say what the event was. They should say what system recorded that information. So was it handheld device? If it's come from another system that's sent the information through, you need a record of where that information has come from. And then obviously the care actor who, either created the record, modified it, amended it. So really this is just a big log table that allows you to see the provenance of the information that you're collecting. The only other area really is a document. So sometimes if someone's done a review of a particular document and they're attesting it, then you want that confirmation. And that might be a signature or something like that. So potentially there'll be an electronic document that proves one of the pieces of the provenance or the audit information around a log. So this is the reason why we're saying that we're removing. You'll see in a lot of these models, I've said we need to remove the person completing the record, because all of that information should be contained within the audit table anyway. Yeah, hopefully that's fairly self-explanatory. In terms of the model itself, again, we haven't really brought back a lot from the gap analysis. It's a fairly simple model. It's used in lots and lots of electronic systems already, so I don't envisage there will be a huge amount to change around it. But again, we're open to feedback if you do think there's anything in there that doesn't make sense, or we need to clarify in a bit more detail, then please say. I mean, really, you've got a date time of that log. You've got the change type, which is creation, amendment, modification, attestation, which is really authorization or signing of a document, and deletion. You've got the system identifier, so the origin, the electronic origin of that record. If it's an attestation, so sign off, you have to say, there's an area to say why it was signed off. The person who committed the change, so that's the care actor who ended up their login details, for instance. It's all probably electronic. It's all probably done automatically. The proof where appropriate, which is a link to a document. And then record identifier, which you would expect for all of these records. So that allows you to link the audit log to the particular piece of information that's been collected elsewhere in the system. So I think that brings us to the end of this section on the gap analysis. I will quickly go to the end of my deck. We'll be sending through the slides afterwards, and they have essentially a link to all of the work that we're currently planning that's come out of the gap analysis. And we'll also be sending through links to the relevant resources, so the mods, which have just been going through in the tool, the conceptual model, which is available on the wiki, and also the service desk where we can collect some feedback.
Just saying, Jyoti's got hand up.
Jyoti, sorry, apologies.
Hi, Adam. Just a question, and this might not be relevant. I had one poll left, which was the administrative individual accompanying person. Did you want that poll to be launched or not?
Administrative accompanying person. I don't think so, no.
No,
I think that's
absolutely fine.
within
Thank
one of
you.
the sections, yeah.
Thank you.
I just would people think about this, and if they can take time to complete the forms, the feedback forms afterwards, and in time, etc. Is this type, the administrative information is obviously got a context beyond the record, obviously challenge and litigation, and I know we're dealing with adults, but it's has been particularly important historically for children in social care, and I'm just raising it as something that's been a feature of discussions around client level data, the national data flow that's now due to be returns are due in 4 June. And that was a key issue around for local authorities, particularly commissioners, where their concerns were records and audit, and just to get people thinking around the importance of this when they answer questions around how important is it. It could be that it isn't for direct, the direct care context has a life for 30 years lawfully in terms of maintaining records. That's just an observation to make around this particular topic area.
Thanks, Andrew. So I think what we'll probably do is, so Mark Chapman. So yes, if you get in touch via the service desk, everything is available via a JSON API. So we've got a JSON API for all of the models in here. So that's the short answer to that question. Get in touch with the service desk. Someone from the team will set you up, and we've got a Swagger API, so you can pull all of the information out of the tool. I think more broadly, as we go through the development of the mod, so after October, where we feel like we've got a really stable and more mature kind of version 1 of this specification, the next step is looking at what are the kind of technical profiles for sharing this information. Are the file profiles already out there? We've done some work on it, and you'll see there is a file mapping project. We're talking to the ICSs. We're working with people like Interweave who are already sharing some of this information. But I think that's kind of post October. The idea for this is we start with the underlying specification, and then we move forward. Yes, Eleanor, it is publicly available. I think if we've got lots and lots of questions for the next webinar, what I will do is, in all the relevant links, I will just put a link through to the public Swagger API, and then you can start pulling all this information out. Fantastic. Cool. Well, thanks everyone for the call. As we said, we'll be sending out links to the feedback forms, and as Andrew mentioned, it is particularly important. We've got this consultation period really going until the end of the month, and then we actually there will be our gap analysis, but anything that's come in we'll be starting to action. We'll be doing kind of targeted interviews over the next month as well, to just get specific individual feedback. But we are really pushing towards this October deadline, and time always moves fast in these projects, even though it feels like a few months away. So please do provide any feedback through that, and look forward to hopefully seeing you all on the next call. Andrew, sorry, one last point.
I was just going to say, although the target is to publish in October, implementation for assured solution providers will be roughly 12 months. That's the contractual requirement. So just to let people know, it's a longer tail for implementation, but therefore critical to sort of baseline it and lock it down as soon as possible.
Thanks, Andrew. Fantastic, cool. Well, I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, and hope you all have a good week.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks. Cheers, Andrew. Bye. Cheers all. Bye.
Cheers.